Hey, are you looking for practical examples on the CSRD reporting? In this podcast episode, I'm going to talk to Jane from We Mean Business, and they just published a guide that is reviewing 30 reports of companies that voluntarily comply with the CSRD. So if this interests you, definitely check out this episode. Hey, Jane. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time. For those of the listeners that don't know you yet, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your business, We Mean Business?
I can. I work for We Mean Business, which is a coalition of 7 NGOs. Amongst those are CDP and World Business Council and others. And we have 16,000 companies that we work with. So we see a lot of solutions. We have many questions also. And I work within the area which calls net zero finance. And that means that I work both with non-financial companies to make them report in a way that is useful for investors. And then on the other side, I also work with investors. So they start using the reports that all the non-financial companies are making. So that's what I do.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. On LinkedIn, I saw your guide for early adopters for the CSRD report. And I thought, when I saw it, I thought it's super fascinating because I have a lot of sustainability managers I talk to, and they are always asking me for practical insight and for some examples and how to do it and to not have it as theoretically, but to actually have some practical insight. So can you maybe tell us just a brief introduction into the guide that you created? And what I would be very curious about, what is the goal of the guide? Why did you create such a piece of content?
Yeah, but we meet exactly the same question as you have met. What should it look like? Because all the companies that we meet, they really want to make it good. But since this is new territory for most companies, they don't know what should it be like. But then we also knew there were a few companies who had made some early adoption or tried to do, at least to make some early adoption of the coming CSRD. So we thought, why don't we take all these companies that we know of and then distill, you could say, some of the more interesting parts. There are also parts in the reports which we have seen many times. For instance, CO2 scope 1 and 2 reporting, we have seen that many times. We don't need to do that again. And that was also one of the ways we selected what to show. That was actually based on what is unusual, what is new, what is it we haven't seen before that might be inspiring for other companies to look at. So that was how we also decided what to go for. So what we did was we looked at 30 companies that we knew had made at least attempts to make CSRD reports. Most of the companies do not claim that they are 100% aligned, and which they are not. But they have taken the liberty to start before it's actually required. And I think that is very, very encouraging to see that companies at least try to make interesting new CSRD reporting.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's such a good opportunity for companies to now look at this and learn from that, and so that we can all develop towards the right direction and learn from each other. So I think that's a very good step and a super helpful content. I would be curious because I talked to some sustainability managers in companies, and they have to report in 26 about their year 25, and they are completely overwhelmed, and it's such a big topic, and they feel like they're behind. So how is it that companies can already report based on the CSRD criteria? And was it difficult to find such companies?
It is very difficult actually to find them. I would have loved to do more companies, but these were the ones we knew of. So it's very much a fishing game, you could say, where you try to, I know these companies, these are usually very good, and then ordinary Google search and stuff. So it is not in any way statistical that these are all the companies who have done CSRD reporting. These are just the ones we knew of. So that's how it works. Then you ask, how were they able to do it before? And many of them actually have done very decent NFRD reporting. The current legislation, they have actually done some decent reporting before. So the leap for them is not that big. as those, as you mentioned, that are to report in reporting year 25. That is usually the large unlisted companies who have not done NFD reporting before. And for them, this will be a really big leap for sure. And that's also why we see that these first movers, you could call them, they get at least some way with the CSRD reporting. But what is interesting is actually also that we can see companies outside of EU trying.
Mm-hmm.
You see Ford from US, CMEX
Mm.
from Mexico, Mondi from UK. So companies from outside of EU are actually also trying to do CSRD reporting because they will have to be covered in 25. So they really try.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about like how come they choose the European criteria for this. But yeah, sure, if it makes sense if they in the future come into it, and maybe also some other countries will adopt similar things to the EU. So for them it already makes sense to like orientate with the CSRD and then they know that it goes towards that direction.
Yeah, that's the first thing. Second thing is, if you can apply the CSRD, which is by far the biggest legislation we have, at least currently on the globe, then you're fairly well going also on other legislation. I'm not saying it's completely aligned, but it's fairly close. So if you can do the CSRD, you can do many things. So I also think that is one of the reasons why at least the large companies outside of EU, they give it a go. Try it.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when we covered like what companies or what reports of companies you included, how did you decide on the topics? You already mentioned a little bit that you were looking at the more interesting parts, but let's say I'm not that familiar with the whole CSRD reports and I haven't seen many before. So what are the interesting parts and how could you tell like, oh, let's have a look at this and this is also interesting?
Yeah. Um, for sure, the double materiality assessment is new for most companies.
Hmm.
So we wanted naturally to see that. And actually, the double materiality assessment, or DMA as it is called, is actually something that the companies will have to report on in stages, because they both have to report on the process that they have been through, and then they have to report on the outcome of this process where they identify which topics is it that we are to report on.
Hmm.
And that is very interesting to see. We can see some similarities in some of the companies that they report on the flow they have for identifying which topics to cover. But then we can also see that they are very different, uh, especially when they are presenting the outcome of this process. Some do it in an illustration of, say, a graph where they take out on the x-axis what is the impact on the company, and then on the y-axis they will have the impact on the society. That is the double materiality components. So,
Hmm.
and you can do that only if you have a small amount of topics. Trouble is, if you are to cover all the material topics in such a diagram, it will be extremely cluttered. So what we also see is that some companies, they make it in tables, and it's actually also very useful. So we have included various examples of how can you actually illustrate your DMA process and your DMA outcome.
Yeah. What I also found super interesting when I was looking at the different double materiality assessments that were in the report, that sometimes they look quite different, or there were graphs that were looking quite different from each other. And I know how the EFRAG has like their example sheet, and there were some that were looking like this, but there were also different variations. So is there like one ideal solution, or are all the different ways to do it basically a good way of like implementing the right process?
You can actually say that the CSRD, in contrast to taxonomy, the CSRD is fairly free in the format of how you will report. So if you, for instance, take some of these illustrations of your plans, plan reporting of how will you reduce your emissions, in the EFRAG guideline, they have an illustration where it's a waterfall model, and many
Hmm.
companies do that. But many companies also realize it's potentially a bit simplistic, and potentially it's not that information heavy as what the investors would like. So they build on this and they extend it, or they do more than just making these waterfall models so that the investors actually can use it for something. And that's perfectly fine. That's very, very good to have a dialogue with your investors to understand what is useful for them and what is not. There are no formal requirements to how it should look. But what I would recommend the companies to do is to consider that they are also to digitize their reporting with the XBRL reporting, which is also coming now. So the more they can make in tables, the easier it is for themselves. The more illustrative they make it, no matter how pretty it is more complicated to tag digital wise. So if they want to make it easier for themselves, then try to put things in a table. It's easier.
Yeah, that's a very good argument. I didn't think about this, but yeah, it makes completely sense that if you want to have it in the XBRL format, then you need to
Yeah.
have it in a certain way, and this tagging format then will make it much easier to compare and see and all of those things. So
Yeah.
yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Beside the DMA, what were other topics that were interesting that you could find in the reports that you looked at?
Another one, which is really, really cool, and which is actually also part of all the legislation, also outside of EU, is what is known as TCFD. TCFD is an old or relatively old idea about that the company is to report on the risk and opportunities, but mainly risks, on what will impact on the company from, for instance, climate change. And the company is supposed to also look at it, how it will impact, for instance, on their asset values, on their provisions, on their going concern. Will we be in business in 5 or 10 years' time now if this will change either physically or transition wise? If what we produce will be illegal or not used anymore, then we are out of business. Then we need to know, what will we do then? And we also need to know let's say that you have a fleet of diesel trucks and you use those trucks to drive your groceries to, or your products to your customers in the inner city around in Europe. But the inner cities around in Europe, they will not allow diesel trucks in the future. Many cities already have forbidden it. What are you to do with these diesel trucks? They should probably be impaired. That means that you have impairment cost on your P&L. So this is having a specific impact on your financial reporting also. And that is very important. And that was one of the things I was looking for, because so far, when companies have done TCFD reporting, they have not been very good at quantifying and monetizing the impact from the climate on their company. And that is what they need to do now. And we found some good examples who were able to do it. So companies can be inspired to see how should that or could that look.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's also a very very good argument, because I talk to a lot of sustainability managers and they always struggle to put monetary values on it.
Yeah.
Like they know that they want to become more sustainable and they also are intrinsically motivated, but at the end of the day, they most of the time have a CFO above them and they need to talk to them and they need to convince them, and they know that they can do this with numbers, with financial numbers. And therefore they're always looking for hi, how can I translate what I know is the right thing, what we want to do, where we want to go, into financial numbers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I will
And that is
definitely.
actually some of the things we talk a lot with companies about, is that the sustainability department and the accounting department or the finance department, they will have to co-work far, far more in the future, because we need both teams. They have different skills, they can do different things, and they need each other and they need to co-work more. And that might be a culture clash because they're very different teams, but they need to do it. And they will also realize, once they start to co-work, that they are actually able to do more than they could apart. So because they can suddenly see these links that they did not know of before, because they have different backgrounds and know different legislations. So but it's really important that they co-work on this.
Yeah. You just said that you were looking forward to this particular aspect. Were there other aspects where you were maybe surprised that how the companies report is actually better than you expected, or maybe in some points it's still like not up to the standard where we would hope they would be? So were there any surprises?
Yeah, I'm still a bit surprised. Even the companies in the forefront are not very good at reporting on, for instance, their internal controls. And that is actually required.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that you can choose not to do. You have to report on your internal controls for your sustainability report. And that is different from the financial report. You have to do it if you're listed, but you don't have to do it if you're non-listed. So this is new for all the non-listed companies, that they have to report on their internal controls environment internally in the company. And they have to consider, how do we do that?
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting topic. I feel like that a lot of companies, like that this in general, if they're not used to report on this, is difficult. And then to do it also on their sustainability topics, where anyhow, like everything is in development and they're still setting up the systems, I can imagine this being quite a challenge. If companies are looking at your report, hopefully, and then also they want to dive into any of the reports further in detail, is there one report where you can say, like, if you only have time to read one report, like have a look at this one, or is this an impossible question?
It's not impossible. What I would suggest is, in the back of the report, we have all the companies listed and we have links to all their reports. One report, which is always good, is Philips. They are really good. They have been good for more than a decade. They're really good. So look at that one. A new one, which I had not noticed before, but which is new, and they are really good, surprisingly good, is Mondi. Mondi is a UK and South African company. They make really interesting reporting, and their notes are very often table-based, very content-wise, they're really, really interesting, and they contain elements that we haven't seen before. So that is interesting. I would really recommend, if companies have the time, to look at the report from Mondi. That is new.
Oh, yeah, that's very interesting. I'm sure that a lot of companies will now have a look, because I know that a lot of companies are always looking for like other reports to have a look and then to like start with their own reporting.
Yeah.
If someone is listening to all the recommendations that you have given so far and then is also checking out the guide, what would you say is the one thing that they should remember from this conversation, like the one bullet point that they can keep in their head and tell to their colleagues? Like, what do you think is an important thing to remember?
Co-work. The difficult part is to co-work. It is still so, unfortunately, in many companies, that the sustainability department is a standalone island, or they work in marketing or communication or something similar. That doesn't work anymore. They will have to co-work with the rest of the company, and especially the financial people. So co-work, that is super important for the companies to succeed with their CSRD reporting, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I 100% agree. Like, I feel like this is like a crucial step, because like the CSRD reporting alone, and there are other reports, like it's super complex. There are so many different tasks that companies and sustainability managers are faced with. So I agree that like co-working is definitely an important keystone to like get all
Yeah.
of this done. Okay. I will definitely link your guide in the show notes so that people have easy access to this. And yeah, but already from this side, from this point of view right now, thank you so much for creating the guide. I was like, really, when I found it, I was like, oh yeah, finally, like this is really necessary and someone needed to do that. So thank you so much for your work, and thank you so much for your time. I hope that we can talk very soon again.
You are so welcome. Thank you.
Hey, if you come this far, thank you very much for listening to the AtlasZero podcast. If you are interested in this topic, we just launched the AtlasZero Navigator, which is basically a product compiled of all the interviews we ever done, all the materials we either created or collected, comprised into one product. It basically helps you to understand all the sustainability reporting requirements of the EU, and we really think it's super helpful. So if you're interested, definitely check out the link below. and check out our product. And also, and I have to ask this, please like and subscribe to our channel. Like, it helps us a ton to reach more people. And at the end, our goal is to help as many companies as possible. So you can help us a little bit in achieving that. Thank you very much. And I hope I see you very soon.